Bam.
I am SEAC retired John Wayne Troxell, and you are watching the Break It Down show. Let's
Man,
go.
oh man,
Boom.
this is awesome. Look, so I'm big on this, John. I'm a ground guy, right? And so I learned this from, I don't know if you know General Wolf. I guess he ran the 82nd in 2009. Maybe he was an adjunct, but he was, that division level kind of commander guy. And he said to me, he's like, Pete, I know everything. You can't go into a briefing where I don't know stuff, except for when it gets to the ground truth. And guys like you don't have access to guys like me. So always be honest, because I need to know what you see, even if it's bad news. And so whenever I can, I try to connect the top to the bottom, the policy to the ground, the sergeant major. And here was when I was building my piece of machine that allowed me to help commanders, the part I had to figure out, the harder part, was how do I help that sergeant major? And I realized one day, because sergeant majors are the standard bearer, and I said to the sergeant major at this battalion, I'm like, hey, I don't want to tell on anybody, but I've been to a lot of units on this camp, and when I see things that are broken, I got to tell you, like rippets in a case floating around. One MRAP had a 50 cal barrel just laying down on the ground, And I'm like, do you care about that? And the sergeant major's like, I care about that. I'll protect you. You tell me what you see. And I'm like, I'm going to tell you the good things too, like dudes wearing the helmets and people hide. I'm going to tell you all that stuff. And that was the last piece. So I guess what I want to say is working with a guy like you, we're talking to someone like you, with someone like me who has access off the post all the time. I can look at our guys. I can look at the enemy. I can look at the people we're trying to help. And it might be a mostly bad news, but you and the boss got to know what the bad news is, so you guys can look. You have all the resources in the world, right? So that's sort of my philosophy on ground truth and how I do it. But I don't know, how does that resonate with you?
I love it. Absolutely love it. The thing that used to upset me all the time, I used to say this all the time in all of my combat tours as a sergeant major. We have to save the troops from themselves first, long before the enemy gets a hold of them. And as you were describing, the complacency that can set in, and I will tell you, the thing I hated the most my first tour, when we were in, soft Humvees, in IED Alley in Route Tampa, is I would see Humvees going down the road with a 50 cal mounted in the back of it. And because it was about 30 degrees out, nobody would be manning that 50 cal. It would be spinning around like it was a ground-based helicopter. And I thought, that's an easy target for the enemy right there.
Yeah.
Or I would see guys all the time. One of my pet peeves as a sergeant major was wearing the protective equipment that was issued to you. It was issued to you for a reason, to protect you, whether that's ballistic eyewear or Nomex gloves or the flame retardant uniforms we wore and everything. And when I would see people deviate from that, by wearing like Oakley half jackets that weren't, approved protective eyewear, or mechanics gloves that were not flame retardant, that would cause a soldier's hands to melt, or things like that, I really took that personally, because Mom and Dad America expect the troops to be highly trained at all time, highly combat ready at all time, and doing the right things all the time. And we all know that throughout a 100-day, 12-month, 15-month, whatever it is, combat tour, where monotony can set in, troops will deviate from that. And without leaders that get after that stuff, then the enemy will have an advantage. And I used to say this all the time, Pete, to my soldiers: I love you so much, I am going to chew your ass for being jacked up. That's how much I love you. If I didn't love you, I would let you walk by. But everything I was doing was related to combat effectiveness, in terms of, okay, a 50 cal, like your example, a 50 cal barrel on the ground. Okay, now I got a barrel that's dirty, a barrel that potentially could have a misfire if I have to put it in, or because it's got dirt in it and everything, you may not be able to set the headspace and timing properly on that 50 cal machine gun because you got a filthy barrel. The things that can get overlooked when we've been in combat and we haven't had enemy contact, for a while, where troops can start doing things like that can have an adverse effect on their performance on the worst day of their life when the enemy does attack.
Yeah. This was a 50 cal barrel floating around free in an MRAP. Can you imagine? Oh my God. Yeah. And I even, normally I don't say anything because that's not my job, and my job's hard enough. But I'm like, hey man, someone's got to police up this 50 cal barrel and strap it up like they're serious about it. And they looked at me like I was crazy. And I'm like, all I got to tell you is I got access to the boss. So I don't want to tell you guys what to do, but you got to fix that. And so the sergeant begrudgingly fixed it.
So, I know we're going to talk about my book, Surrender or Die, Reflections of a Combat Leader. But I talk about in there a chapter when I was a Stryker Brigade Command Sergeant Major during the surge in Iraq. I was Surge Brigade number 4 out of President Bush's 5 surge brigades. And I knew the area we were going into, the northern Baghdad belt and Saladin province, had not seen a lot of U.S. forces in there because we had focused so much within Baghdad. And I knew this was going to be a tough fight. And as we got in there, I mean, it was a tough fight, and the first 2 weeks, the boss and I had to go to the morgue 8 times to identify remains of troops that were killed. And overall, through that 15-month tour, we lost 54 and had over 500 severely wounded. But a lot of that was up front, where we weren't accustomed to the battle space, and we were still struggling with ourselves. And so when I sensed this complacency setting in, when I would go out, I'd go out on patrol. Infantry squads wouldn't have their machine guns with them. They wouldn't have their camelbacks on to carry water. And what was the reason? Because when you sit in the back of a Stryker, that camelback isn't comfortable. Okay, is it more uncomfortable than not having water if you're going to be in an hours-long firefight and everything? So when I would start seeing this deviance to what right was, I said, I'm going to hold leaders accountable. And so I created this thing called the bullpen. And I would go out on the battlefield, and if I found squads, platoons, companies screwed up, I would grab the platoon sergeant and squad leader, and I'd put them in my bullpen in my back of my Stryker for 48 hours. And I would take them back to the FOB with me every night. And initially, I was trying to give them retraining, by filling sandbags and stuff that privates do. But when you know the deal, when you're asking infantrymen and artillerymen to do stuff like that, they can fill sandbags all day long. So I had to change it. And what did I do? I made them get behind a computer and write a 2,000-word typed double space APA approved essay on what an effective leader is in combat. You talk about changing behavior and modifying leader behavior in a hurry. And once that started getting around, all of a sudden, I wasn't finding those kind of, lackadaisical attitudes and a reduction in standards and stuff like that. And, this was the thing that got me the most, Pete, was this was an attached unit with us. And I was out on patrol with this platoon in the Muqtadiya area, which was a very, very dangerous place in the Diyala province, which was the caliphate for the Islamic State in Iraq at the time.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, this platoon gets enemy contact, and now they're pursuing the enemy, and they potentially had the ability to corner the enemy and destroy them. Well, all of a sudden they stop for a security halt, and then the platoon leader comes back and says, hey, we're breaking contact. I said, what do you mean you're breaking contact? He said, well, the chow hall is about to close on Fob Warhorse, and I want to make sure the boys don't miss chow. And I thought to myself, this is the big one, Elizabeth. I'm coming to join you, honey. I'm thinking to myself, you mean to tell me that you are in hot pursuit of the enemy, you have them cornered, you have the ability to pinpoint them and, put some ordnance on them and destroy them off the battlefield after they open fire on you, and you're going to break contact so the boys don't miss the chow hall? I think the boys can go with an MRE for dinner for one night so that you can take a bunch of terrorists off the battlefield. But when we have an imbalance in leadership, as you know, between empathy and discipline and accountability that gets after efficiency, this is the kind of stuff that happens on the battlefield. And all of a sudden, we start relinquishing competitive advantages to our enemy because we're trying to be so compassionate and empathetic to our troops who are so far away from home. But what we don't understand, and as you and I understand, is that the need for emotive leadership that provides inspiration, purpose, motivation, direction, and discipline is when you're in combat. That's when you need it the most. so that you can be on your A game every day. And so that's, again, I was probably voted the biggest asshole on the planet as the brigade sergeant major then. But guess
Yeah.
what? Those troops could be back home in their local bar, drinking beer with their friends and their family, and talking shit about this big asshole because I did the things that would keep their focus on what they should be, which
Yeah.
is defeating the enemy, protecting the population, and continuing to give the Iraqi security forces and governance time and space to get better. And so I'm with you on all of that.
Yeah.
Is all of that stuff matters. And my concern in today's military, because of this people first initiative, which I fully support, about taking care of our troops and their families first, but that thing gets morphed as it goes from the strategic through the operational to the tactical, and all of a sudden it becomes me first. And all of a sudden you got leaders looking for 4-day work weeks or getting off at 1,500 every day. And I'm thinking to myself, when I was a platoon sergeant squad leader, I didn't want to get off early. Give me more range time. Give me more time to jump out of airplanes. Give me more time to perfect my craft so that I know that I'm best effective in combat.
Yeah, man, that's such great stuff. The like the medal list, because people don't know that there's like a task list that you would have to master in one era of the Army, and you'd say, being a counterintelligence agent, Pete, means you have to have mastery of 500 tasks. Like 500 tasks. When are we going to train on all those? And then if the sergeants aren't training across that spectrum, or if they've prioritized, you're like, all right, well, these, and so it gets to be really hard to maintain mastery across all these things. And we probably got away from that model for that reason. But there are those things. And I want to bring this up, and I want to push your sergeant majorness. I want to push against it, because sometimes sergeant majors, from my point of view here, become combat obsolete because they are so focused on the standard, they're missing what the standard needs to be. So, for example, I was on Diamondback, and you go over the northern part of the ring route around the airport, and you are on the fence line of the red zone. And so the unit before, we all got it. We got mortared all the time, and then we got shots taken at us. And so we would boogie scoot across that. We would exceed the speed limit, which is like 15 miles an hour. And then we go whipping by one of the gates. We'd slow, we wave, and everybody could see. We all had a dance that we did. The new sergeant major did not like that dance. And so he followed me all the way around the other side of the camp. And he's like, "What are you doing speeding?" And I'm like, "I'm not speeding around anybody. I'm trying to stay alive, man. We get shot around here, And he could not grasp that. And I'm going to be hard on that dude, but he was more worried about best lawn on the post competitions than, I'm not lying, right? Than he was about me getting to the opposite side of the camp, where there were maybe 20 people on the entire flank of that camp. And it was an exposed area. It was an area that took all of the contact. And I was like, man, you don't have any idea how irrelevant you are right now. Like, you cannot drive 5 and 10 miles an hour around the top part of this camp. So how do you, as a sergeant major, another time up in Mosul at the other camp, we in a striker, we got hit, and we laid in a bunch of diesel, and we repaired and self-recovered and got people medevaced out of there. And then we finally got to go to chow, and we were covered in diesel, blood, dirt, everything. And the sergeant major lost his shit when we tried to go eat chow, but we hadn't had chow in half a day. We just we would gladly would have gone through and grabbed our plates and left, or even sent 2 dudes or whatever. We were glad to work within the system, but he instead screamed at us. And I was a civilian, so I'm like, I'm just going to go on in. So I just went in. But all of these soldiers, they needed chow, man. We were wiped out. We'd been baked in the sun all day long. And I was always so disappointed in him for not figuring a way through that. And because these guys had a really, and I tried to tell them later on, I'm like, hey, we got blown up. People got hurt. And we just want to get chow and we'll go to bed and get ready to go do that again tomorrow. And he could not wrap his head around that.
So I think you bring up a great point. And, as a sergeant major, there's, I talk about leading by example all the time for any leader, but especially for a sergeant major. It starts with your presence. Okay. And if your presence is mainly in combat at the chow hall, or chasing down Pete Turner because he's speeding and stuff like that, you're going to be combat irrelevant. You're absolutely right. You're going to be combat irrelevant, but your presence. So if you're out in the battle space and you are sharing in the hardships that the troops are, and you're seeing what they're going through, in their combat outposts, on their combat patrols, or on their missions and everything, then you'll get a feel for where the discipline needs to be enforced. And for me, it was on battlefield performance. All right, you know, I'm like you. When I was a battalion level sergeant major up north at KR West, my first go around in 2003, I got a speeding ticket on both. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, we're getting rockets launched at us and everything, and you know anyway. I mean, it got squashed and everything, but to the point was, why are we focusing on this when we're in the middle of combat? So, I go back to, its presence, but performance as well. As a sergeant major, you have to understand that you're a rifleman just like the rifleman you have in your organization, or a scout or whatever, and you got to be able to do the things they do. So your performance will speak volumes, along with your presence, and then your persistence at how to apply the art of influence in a combat situation. And so I always, my 4 focus areas were always, you have to know ourselves. We have to know ourselves. What are our strengths and weaknesses? What do we have to get better at? But more importantly, do we understand our battle space? Do we understand the danger areas like you're talking about and everything? So it's knowing ourselves, knowing the enemy, of course, in doctrinal terms, size, composition, disposition, strength, morale, most likely, and most dangerous courses of action. And what are their abilities to attack us? Like you just described, if the northern area of Diamondback, which I remember frequently or very well, was a dangerous area, then we shouldn't have the dang, traffic mafia out there, or the sergeant major being the traffic mafia when guys are doing some things that are to prevent themselves from getting attacked. And then we have to know our partner forces, and we got to know the population. And the more we know those 4 things, we will be relevant on the battlefield. And then we will understand where that discipline needs to be applied. And I'm with you. I didn't spend a lot of time in the chow hall as a battalion and brigade sergeant major in combat, because that's not where the majority of my force was. It was out in the battle space. And that's where I needed to have my influence, and then as a corps level sergeant major in Afghanistan, in charge of all combat forces, I was in 32 of the 34 provinces for that whole year.
Right.
So I think, sometimes mundane tasks that get after good order and discipline at the first sergeant level, all of a sudden continue to get elevated. And if a sergeant major doesn't grow out of that from what a first sergeant should do, and as they move up in rank and position, and they continue to focus on those same things, they can find themselves irrelevant in a hurry. And Pete, you know this, nobody's going to tell them they're irrelevant because he's the sergeant major. All right. So the whole organization may be going this way and he might be going that way. And ain't nobody going to tell him, especially the civilian Pete Turner, going to tell him that he's going the wrong way. So, I always say, as a sergeant major, you have to have the pulse of your force and what's going on. And I say, if young officers are coming to talk to you looking for advice, or if NCOs and troops want to talk to you and everything, then you're probably relevant. You're probably doing all the right things with your presence, your performance, and things like that. But if it's lonely and the only person you're talking to is the commander and the staff isn't even talking to you, then you probably need to, relook at yourself or do a self-reflection and say, what do I need to do to get better? Because I'm with you. Again, safety is paramount and all these other things. I get it. All right. But if you're a sergeant major and that's what your focus is, and it's inside the forward operating base, brother, you're irrelevant. And if you don't know what's going on and you can't give advice to your commander on how to effectively employ your troops based off of what you know about the enemy, my two favorite people in combat were my S3 and S2. I would get up every day and I'd have a plan to battlefield circulate to visit our troops. And I would say, what is the enemy doing today, S2? And he would kind of give me, and then I would look at the S3, what are we doing to counter that? And then he would say, well, this is where we're putting effort, or we're going after a high value target on this objective, and this battalion, this company's going after it. All right, saddle up, boys. We're going with that company because I want to be where the point of friction is so I can give best advice to the commander on how we're doing out here. And that's what I think is a lost art now. And we've got, I see this, and God bless all of our senior enlisted and everything, but I see too many leaders that focus on that mundane shit. That isn't, don't get me wrong, it's important, but that's first sergeant business,
Yeah.
the chow hall and all of that. You have to focus, you as a sergeant major have to focus on what's important to your boss based on his vision and priorities. And if you're not doing
Man.
so
Yeah.
I'm with you.
I'm with you. And one of the things, look, you don't learn this stuff right away. And so some of these errors that I'm talking about, this is 04. This is early. And so even sergeant majors, if you've never deployed before, and it's very possible that someone in 04 hadn't deployed anywhere like Iraq, and so they've also got to learn and adapt. And I bet those sergeant majors improved as they went along, and they found how to nest within the mission and hold the standard. I have this all these things in the military. This is true. Like there's always time for safety, or you can say there's always time for safety, right? And somewhere in between, the mission has to be paramount. When I deployed to Bosnia, the force protection general, he's like, I'm in charge of force protection. The standard is no Americans get hurt. I'm like, well, why don't we just go to Kansas? Because it's just not that place, man. So you have these incongruences between all these different commanders and what the mission is, and trying to work within all that. It becomes very confusing. And if you're a sergeant major, and some dude like Pete shows up, and I start bringing bad news, because my job is to help the commander win and loot and suck less. And if that means, and the way I look at this, and I think this will work for you, John, is I go to any commander, I already know their mission statement. It's close with and destroy the enemy, protect the force, teach and train the local governmental assets, police, military, whatever it's going to be, and then enable the enablers that do that. Do those 4 things, and you've got a successful mission. And so I'm nesting within those 4 things. I don't need the 2 shop to tell me what the IIRs or the information requirements are. I'm a pro. I know what to do. And the things I'm going to bring are going to sting, because if I'm not making it sting and hurt for you and the boss, then you need a better intel guy. I'm going to bring you the hard truth. Like, hey, we're getting fucked up by the, by the PSYOPs guys. They are not in alignment with where you're going. And they need to know that. That makes the PSYOPs guys pissed at me. It makes staff pissed. And when the boss comes to me and they inevitably do, it's like, Pete, what do you think we should be doing? And I go, oh, I cannot replace the staff. They will kill me. And then the colonel will beg me, like, listen, I want your advice. I'll take care of the staff. Now I'm protected. But I'm like, what about Sergeant Major? No. I got those guys covered. Because if you bring bad news, that is what the commander and the sergeant major need, man, you can become unpopular. And I've been kicked off camps. I've been kicked out of theater. But one time I got my ass saved because I had said something and I made some 06 mad. And my boss said, you show me where Pete's wrong and I'll send him home. And then the DCO, for the audience, that's a brigade. He's like the brigade's commander's right hand. He goes, fuck, all right. And so he had to go calm down another 06 because what I had said was true. And I had built up trust with those guys. But it's that simple to lose a valuable asset. It's that simple to continue to lose. And man, I got to tell you, from my experience, most units came ill-prepared. They had obsolete plans, using worn out, tired equipment, and they were going to go encircle the Taliban and destroy them. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're not going to do that. They're not going to fight with you. No one's going to stack arms and march off the battlefield.
Yeah. Oh, I'm with you. And what I hated, and this was 2011 and 12, when I was the senior enlisted leader of all the combat forces there, is, based on what you just said, I would go down and visit a brigade level or a division, regional command, and their mission statement would be defeat the Taliban through security force assistance. And I'm thinking to myself, so you're going to train in this year, you are going to train the Afghan security forces to a certain level that they can defeat the Taliban. It ain't going to happen. All right. And I heard it so many times from commanders or their sergeant majors. Well, this is what we hope. I said, hope is not a method. So let's use some language that will resonate with the troops. I expect you to disrupt or neutralize or something. When we say defeat, as you know, being an intel guy, that means they have nothing that they can do anymore. They are done as a fighting force. And for 20 years, we had the same mission statement in every battle space, and we didn't get it done. So I think, we've got to continue to use language that is relevant and the troops understand. I mean, when a brigade commander says we're going to defeat the Taliban, those platoon leaders and platoon sergeants on the ground know that's not going to happen. They're going to give it their best effort. Don't get me wrong, but we got to come up with more effective language and more, makes sense kind of visions on what we can have an impact on in our battle space for however long we're there. And then we got to have people like you that can come in and tell us if we got our heads up our asses. Because, too many times, there's leaders that think they're doing everything's, beer and Skittles here. We're doing great and everything. And somebody would come in from an outside agency, Joint IED Defeat or one of those others, and would say, no, you guys are getting your asses handed to you. And here's why. And this became apparent to me when I was in Afghanistan. And Regional Command Southwest and Regional Command South, as you know, were, contiguous battle spaces right next to each other. But there were 6 provinces, 3 on either side, that had the most violence in the entire country, out of Kandahar, which is Zari, Panjwai, and Maiwan provinces, and then in Helmand province, Nari Siraj, Sangin, and I can't even remember the last one. But anyways, but here we are, and the enemy knew that this was a natural break between forces, that Regional Command South was here, Southwest was here. And so they would continue to flip-flop and do things, and neither one of these regional commands were talking to each other or sharing. They were sending information up, but there wasn't a lot of lateral kind of communication, adjacent unit coordination. And so that information would go up, and then it would kind of be stovepipe. And then one day I was down there and I was visiting both sides, and I said, it sounds to me like the enemy is trying to confuse us on what they're doing here, because we'll have attacks on the bridge, the dam up by Sangin in RC Southwest. And then the next day, we'd have a similar kind of attack down in Maiwan province in Kandahar. And they kept flip-flopping back and forth. So we didn't have a good read on the enemy and everything. And so that's when I went to the J2 and said, hey, look, we've got this information dominance cell here for a reason. We got to start looking cross regional commands and start putting this together and doing a pattern analysis on the enemy that will get us to be more effective and where we can apply assets to neutralize, disrupt, deny, or whatever we think we can do to them. So even as late as 10 years ago, we still had these stovepipes within our intelligence collection and information sharing that was causing us not to have a good read on the enemy. And my concern today is, do we still have those same things that potentially could happen if we end up in a fight in Eastern Europe or the Middle East continues to escalate?
Yeah, boy, oh boy. Yeah, and I want to get into the current events, but I do want to give an example that I think fits nicely with what you're talking about was, so there are 2 things that I would do that are really successful. So we would go and have some kind of medical operation or a farming engagement. And I'd just go back 2 weeks later and be like, what's really going on here? Let's not see the performance. Let's see the reality. And, as a sergeant major, that's hard for you to do, because as soon as you show up, like, Sergeant Major's here, and everything changes, right? But Pete could show up anywhere. And I'd be like, hey, can someone get me out to that valley over there? Now, we were there a week ago. I'm like, that's exactly what I want to go. And I would go and I would ask simple questions like this. I would say, hey, Farmer Bob, what happened here about a week ago? Well, nothing really happened. Have you seen anybody from the government here? No. And you have all these impressions on what we did. It briefs well, but look at that slide. That slide's great. And then Pete comes back with, here is the book report from what 10 different people saw last week. And what you guys said happened, I didn't know what happened. And that kind of thing. So that internal language. And now if you cross borders, so this is in Iraq, Baghdad province in the south of us is Diyala. I think that's right, Diyala province. And so we're trying to teach and train the police there, trying to make them be proficient. And so I go out to these lieutenants, these young cops, and I'm like, hey, man, what's life like out here? You don't have a lot of support. You're pretty far from the mothership. What's working, what's not working? Because no one else does that. And so he's like, you know what, man? And he didn't talk like that, but he's pretty country. He's a pretty country Iraq guy. He's like, you know what, man, I'm all right day to day. Like I can handle that part of my mission, but there's things that happen that you guys do that mess me up. And so I got families coming to me wanting to know where their husband is. And I don't know. No one tells me.
Yeah.
And I'm telling them to use the police, channels, and they go up higher and no one has an answer. And then I find out, I don't know, weeks later that the person has been arrested. And so I'm writing all this stuff down because the boss needs to know this. Like people are being abducted without warrants. And we have a warrant system. We were trying to use it. So what happens? I write this report. It goes up. It comes down to the special operations side. And the people partner with the Iraqi special forces. And the very next day they go out and they arrest the dude. And how do they serve the warrant? With a knife on the kitchen table. And I'm like,
yeah,
that's not the point, man. Like, come on. And so when I bring that back to the colonel, he's like, I can only fight so many things. It's hard enough to do our job here. I can't fix that. Right. And that's one of these things where you're across a seam and we're not able to communicate internally. I'm going to give you one more example vertically. I'm in a valley in Afghanistan. The Afghan police get into a firefight with us. And so they need to reprovision. I'm like, oh, this is a great chance to test and see how well the government works. And so I talked to the DCOP and he's like, I'm going to request ammo. It's going to go like this. This is when I can expect it to come down. And so I trail that request. And at one point I lose track of it. And so I finally find it and he gets killed by an American, by an NCO. And he's like, oh, that guy's corrupt. Geez. And I'm like, man, that is not your job. And so now I've got to write this thing that's a report that goes in several directions and speaks clearly about what happened and how this is a negative response to the government working. And not because the government didn't work, but because we didn't trust ourselves to get out of the way, And all of these things, to your point, is that it's that hard to get this stuff right. You can have a win right in front of your face, or at least a common silly problem that we can maybe fix through partners. But if we get in our own way, which was the truth all the time, we were in our own way, we'd make our own mistakes, we can't win.
Hey, I'm with you. This goes back to understanding your battle space, understanding all the things that we've been talking about, the culture, the people, the civilians on the battlefield, your partner forces, as well as the enemy and everything. And, when we go into a battle space, truth, justice, in the American way. But there are some times that you have to sink to a certain level of hell to gain the necessary impact that you're trying to have in your battle space. So if there are criminal patronage networks out there or, corrupt political officials, but they are still assisting you, then, hey, we got to use them. I'll give you the biggest one was General Razik, who was, the chief of police in Kandahar province, the most influential general in the entire Afghan, security forces. And that dude would run drugs. I mean, he was making millions off drugs, the poppy fields in Helmand and all this stuff. But when we did a named operation and we needed security forces in places like the Arghandab Valley or, down in Spin Boldak, and everything like that, that dude came through with the necessary forces. And then when we would go through and do the IED clearances on the routes in Zari and Panjway and areas like that, and then we needed security, he would pull his border police, some of his border police, and he would have them up there securing these areas that we clear. So he was someone we could count on. Okay. So we were there to utilize him in a way that would allow us success in what we were trying to do, which was, to get after the Taliban and Al Qaeda, the fringe elements there, and Hekmatar and all those other guys' forces. But more importantly, safeguard the civilian population and start building some good governance and things like that. Unfortunately, it was a few years ago, that Razik got assassinated because the Taliban knew that this was one of the guys we relied on. And so he had 9 lives. The dude had 7 or 8, attempted assassinations on him, one while I was there. But he was one of the most respected generals there. And, what he did on the side had no bearing on what we were trying to do. It might have had a little bit of bearing, but his criminal network or whatever he was doing was far less than what he was doing to help us out. And when leaders
Right.
can't see through that, I'm not suggesting that we go out and support corrupt leaders. I'm suggesting that we have to understand that they're out there. And how do you leverage some of these local leaders that might be doing things? They might be Tony Soprano, but they're also somebody that can help us get after the safety and security of our battle space, but more importantly, safeguard U.S. and coalition troops from enemy attack. And you really, especially as a sergeant major, you have to know your battle space and you have to know everything about it. And that kind of stuff is far more important than kicking guys for oily coveralls out of the chow hall or chasing down, Pete Turner on the north side of Diamondback because he's speeding. All right.
Yeah. He's lickety splitting across the camp. Yeah. So there's a couple things I want to ask you about this, because this isn't just young troops, NCOs, junior officers. We had a general show up. This is a South Central Zabul province. So this is next door to this. People who don't know that.
I know it well.
We're like right in the middle, right? And our border is Pakistan, and there's all kinds of problems that leak through because border is Pakistan, and so we're struggling to control things. And we would have these generals come in and like, "Hey, we're going to improve the bazaar," and you're like, "Who the fuck are you? What are you talking about? Like, we don't even have a road out to this part of the world. Like the road is basically impassable. And every couple of years, and I love doing this, right? I would go into the SharePoint server, or I'd look on the walls to see the pictures from the previous units. And it's like, in 2006, we opened Route Chicken. And then I'm like, how many times have we opened Route Chicken? Because I take that and I go to the 3 and I'm like, hey man, I'm all about opening Route Chicken. I'm on your guys' team. What do we do that's different than the last 4 times we opened Route Chicken? Why? What is happening? And so first off, captains couldn't handle that, but generals also couldn't handle it. And so when you tell a general, hey, the Taliban decides who gets a franchise out here, we're not going to rebuild a bazaar. And if we are, it's got to be, and it's the biggest thing I learned, John, and I know this will work for you. I'm talking to out in that district. It's, one full district off of the main route. And he says, Pete, there's only room for one sword in the scabbard. And I'm like, fuck me, that's right. So I go to my boss and I'm like, and he's got it. He gets it. He's like, okay, well then he's the sword. And so I sat down with that Afghan leader and I extracted from him his plan. And then I jumbled it all up like a NE4 would do. And I presented it back to him. And he's like, no, dummy. And he reassembled it back into the order, timelines, provisions. And it was pretty simple. But it was in a way that we could all see that he had a plan, when he needed our help, when he didn't need our help. And so we were able to, and what he was not, and he walked me down the bazaar. I got him out of his office. He's like, the bazaar will look like this at some point, but no time soon. First, we got to do this. First, we got to do this. First, one of the things he said to me was, the number one priority is getting girls educated. And I'm like, how do we do that? He's like, well, first off, we have to educate boys. And I'm like, okay, sounds like boys are the first priority. He's like, no, girls are first. First, you have to do boys because our society runs on men. The next thing you have to do is you have to establish security. So a dude needs to be able to go to work and not be worried about being killed. If we can't do that, you can't get boys taught anything. So if a dude can safely go to work and come back, now he's going to worry about his compound when he's gone. Is that going to be safe? Because if that's safe, then he can project his kids to school. So you had fully 4 steps before you could get to girls. And we're talking about the goddamn bazaar. And in that area, if you did things that looked like they were Americans, that put you on Front Street with the Taliban. So if you grew your grapes on a trellis, if you used the pump in the middle of town, if you took money to start a small business, you were going to get a knock on the door, and we couldn't do a damn thing about it.
Yeah. That's where I think, Pete, that in a battle space like that, and then the Israelis are living with this right now and what they're doing in Gaza. There is an art to trying to get what you need to get accomplished. Okay. There are certainly humanitarian things that you need to get right. And a bazaar would go a long way. But in trying to get in the Afghan culture, trying to get women educated would go a long way. But you got to have a lot of things in place long before that, or you are setting, the local citizens up for disaster. And like you were describing, the night letters that will end up on their door, or worse, the night knocks on their door. And next thing you know, they're in shallow graves with their hands tied behind their back, missing their head, you know?
Yeah.
And so, too many times we don't think about that in combat and where we can get the best effect, you know, with through lethal, non-lethal, and humanitarian means. And if we don't have the situation right in terms of safety and security, then we certainly can't go on to the humanitarian stuff and try to turn it over to the locals, you know. I think you remember the radios in the box that we were handing out to all the Afghans.
Don't get me started.
Because we wanted them to be listening to our themes and messages instead of the Taliban's that was on their own local radio. And we never made traction with it the way we could have because we didn't have the safety and security situation to a place that it needed to be, where all of a sudden these Afghan citizens would listen to U.S., you know, themes and messages, even though, you know, they were in the local language and everything. But yeah, so sometimes we don't get that right, you know. And it's not that we're bad people or anything like that, but we don't understand where we can make that impact. And you know, I just, you know, the Israelis are going through it now. Think of this, you know, they were ruthlessly attacked. Hundreds, thousands of Israelis were butchered. Bunch of hostages, to include Americans and other nations' citizens as well, and everything. And the president, Netanyahu, says, we're going to go in and we are going to annihilate. We are going to destroy Hamas. Okay? We're not going to go in and do it the way Hamas did Israeli citizens, by beheading them and butchering them and raping them and you know, at concerts and stuff like this. We're going to do the necessary planning and preparation. And then they gave the necessary messaging to, you know, the people in Gaza and everything. You know, they're using tactical call outs. They're doing all the necessary things to try to preserve innocent lives. But in the end, Israel has been attacked. And like I said earlier, the thing that impressed me the most in terms of themes and messages is when Netanyahu went on his national TV and he sent a message to Hamas: you are all dead men walking, because we are not going to stop until we annihilate you off the planet. Now, as you and I both know, it's easy to defeat a radical jihadist fighter, but it's extremely hard to defeat the ideology that drives them to be radical jihadists. So there's a lot of hard work that the Israelis going to have to go through, but they are going through and doing things the way we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's going to be tough sledding. I don't think they're ever going to be able to get to the end state necessary, but the American people have to understand, and those around the world that continue to want to support Hamas and the messaging they have and everything. And I've even seen people now supporting Osama bin Laden's letter from way back after 9/11, and they truly don't understand how insidious and how savage these terrorists are. And so, you know, again, you know, if we can sit here and complain that the Israelis are using a heavy hand and everything, but they are doing all the things necessary, to include, you know, through these ceasefires the past few days, letting humanitarian aid in and everything. But they are on mission. And when the president, Netanyahu, says we are going to annihilate them, think of what that does to the troops on the front line in Gaza City and places like that. They know that this is an existential threat to them as a nation. And the citizens and the soldiers that are in the fight right now are going to take that to the nth degree in terms of understanding that they, as Israel, are going to continue to, you know, get after that enemy that is trying to take them off the planet.
And you're seeing what the IDF is doing. Now imagine, and I know you know this, and I've been telling my friends, like, understand there's a history here. You go to Munich and you look at what happened in Golda Meir.
Yeah.
She's a damn warlord. She's like, listen, be alive and be against us. We're going to fix that. We're going to kill
you.
Yeah,
during the 72 Olympics. Yeah.
Man, they would go anywhere on the earth and they're going to kill innocent people. They're like, that's too bad. I guess they died, you know, because they don't play. I'm not condoning violence, but they will go to, Oh, the money flows out of Qatar. Well, guess what? You go pick up your phone and transact some transactions. We're going to follow you and we're going to blow you up. Like it's going to happen. They're going to kill people in Qatar. They'll kill them in. And when he says the earth, he means all of it. I mean, they went and kidnapped Eichmann from a sovereign country, you know, and they're like,
Massoud went to South America and got all these Nazis and everything. Where do we think they're not going to go after these Hamas leaders, you know?
Yeah, they will do
it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we need to be prepared for the fact that they are not going to go lightly. Like they're cooperating with the ceasefire right now, but they don't really need our help. It's great that we're there and we're obviously going to be a partner. But it's interesting when you look at the world and who recognizes Palestine versus who recognizes Israel. And there are more countries that recognize Palestine than Israel. So that tells you a lot about where a lot of places stand. And as we do our foreign policy, you know, it's tough to reckon with all of that. You know, not all people from Palestine are bad, but the vast majority of them do not like Israel. You can say that legitimately. They may not be able to pick up arms, but it's hard to sort out the innocent people from the other people. And when the enemy attack is so brutal, it's so outside of the norms of what combat is supposed to be, you know, people are going to die. That's just what's going to happen.
And if this would have been an attack out of Gaza on the Israeli fort, the IDF, it would probably be something different. You know, our language and our foreign policy would probably be a little bit different. But because it was a brutal, you know, just torture and slaughter of innocent Israelis, you know, we have to be behind the Israelis. And, you know, a lot of people that have never been to Israel, like you and I, there's over 1 million Palestinians that live in Israel, outside the West Bank and outside Gaza. You know, I went there a couple times, and you know, I would go onto a beach right there overlooking the Mediterranean, and there were more Palestinians on that beach than there were Israelis. You know, so some people think that, you know, we've got this sectored off and everything, and that Palestinians don't have anywhere to go and everything like that. Hey, you know, Egypt and Syria needs to open up, you know, the crossing points, you know, more and everything. There's a lot that Arab countries can do to help here. And I know that some, Saudi Arabia and others, are helping. But, you know, in the end, you know, Israel was brutally attacked, and they are going to retaliate, just like we did on 9/11. And people forget about that. They forget about the 3,000 people that were killed on that day, the 373 firefighters that went into the Twin Towers that gave their lives and everything. And the citizens that brought down Flight 93 in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, when it was heading towards the Pentagon and everything. We forget about that. Understand that at that point in time, we were attacked and we were going to get after it. And guys like you and I and millions of other U.S. citizens, maybe not happily, but we readily went into Iraq and Afghanistan to make sure that our nation was never going to get attacked again. Okay. And we did it in the way that the Israelis are doing now. We were going after the enemy, but the enemy uses human shields. They use the population and everything. So we try to mitigate civilian casualties as much as we can. But in the end, you know, it's combat. And I'm sorry. And bad things happen that we wish wouldn't happen.
When you were a SEAC, you're advising, you're at the very top. I mean, that's as influential as it's the most influential enlisted person in the entire military. And so when you see something like what Iran is doing, where they put these routinely, not just now, but always put, you know, we're going to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. The Zionism must die. Hey, we have a nuclear weapon that we're going to, like they've said all kinds of insane things. And now they're taking cracks at U.S. forces. I mean, look, I'm not a hawk.
74 attacks. 74 attacks on our troops in Syria and Iraq since 17 October.
So when do we start to push back and say, hey, you're welcome to do what you want to do with other countries, but this country, no, like if Pete is president, I'm going to be a little bit crazy here. I'm going to send the Iranian president a list and be like, pick a target, whichever ones you want. But the next time we get hit, we're taking that building out. And, you know, just letting you know in advance, or just don't target us. So if you target us, it's going to be a cost and it's going to be a building. So make sure you let everybody know it's coming. And I'll put that thing out in the open. Here is what's going to happen. Here are the 32 buildings. You want to pick a different order, that's fine. But the next time you guys send something our way, you're going to get something back, and it's not going to be, and we're going to escalate real fast with that. But we don't have that kind of, and I don't want to start a war. I want to end it. I don't want to give Iran purchase, because they will push, and they know that, especially right now, and I'll be critical of the Biden administration, they know that they're going to be soft and pliable.
Yeah. So when you look at, past presidents, let's look at President Obama. I mean, he sent SEAL Team 6 into Pakistan to get bin Laden. Okay.
Right.
Think of the backlash that could have came from that. But he was confident, and we did it. Even though things went a little bad on the objective, we still got the mission accomplished. He also approved a drone strike on Anwar al-Awlaki, who is the head of Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, a U.S. citizen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And guess what? It had an effect on AQAM, but more importantly, it had an effect on those Iranian proxies there in terms of, the Houthis with their shark boats and everything. And then you go to President Trump, here he sees videos of, the Russians with, the Syrian forces under Assad using these barrel bombs to attack innocent Syrians with chlorine weapons and all this. And he saw the videos of these babies suffocating to death. And he looked at Mattis and said, do something. And so we dropped 59 Tomahawk missiles on Russian and Syrian sites all along the middle Euphrates River Valley on the west side of it and everything. It had a huge impact, because I think at that time Putin was like, damn, this Trump might be a crazier motherfucker than me,
That's right.
And then we took out al-Baghdadi when he was getting off of his plane in Baghdad, and vaporized him off the planet. And I say this, and I even say it in the book, I have zero remorse and zero regret that President Trump called for that, strike onto Baghdadi, because I remember what the IRGC was doing during the surge in Iraq, as you remember, providing, these explosive form penetrators that killed one of my soldiers on my patrol when we were attacked, the worst day of my life, and plenty of my other soldiers, with these explosive form penetrators, these copper headed weapons and everything. And so I had zero remorse and zero regret that, I'm sorry, not Baghdadi, Soleimani is the guy we took out. We also took out Baghdadi and everything. But those kinds of acts send a huge message.
Yep.
And the messaging I hear now, where be careful to the Iranians and don't, it is not going to have, as you and I know, it's not going to have the impact on the Iranians nor any of their proxies, whether it's the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, or, any of the Shia militia groups that are in Syria and Iraq or in places like that are conducting these attacks, So I want to make sure I was talking about Soleimani, who we took out on the Baghdad. Yeah. And then we took out Baghdadi in a tunnel. But there's two presidents that went after some of these key leaders, and that sends a huge message that we're not going to put up with any of this BS. So deterrence through appeasement never works. And, last week I was in Washington, D.C. at a fireside chat with Peter Bergen and Dr. Michael Vickers. And if you know Dr. Michael Vickers, former CIA agent, former Green Beret, but CIA agent, who had a lot to do with Charlie Wilson's war as we were looking to assist the Afghan jihadists going up against the Soviet Union and everything. And, here I am with all these career Army strategists around me. And I asked this question. I said, does deterrence through appeasement ever work? And 100% said, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Does peace through strength work? 100%, absolutely yes. And so, when we are trying to, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that we were in with the Iranians, when I was the SEAC, and when President Trump came in and pulled us out of that agreement, think of that. We were giving billions of dollars to the Iranians with the pledge that they would not enrich uranium to start developing nuclear weapons. And we all know, and I'm sure you got friends in the intelligence agencies that will tell you that wasn't happening. But when we pulled out of that, I happened to be in Africa, and then I made my way over to Yemen to visit our elite Navy special operators there. And there was about 13 or 14 Iranian intelligence analysts there that were supporting that elite Navy Special Operations Unit. I asked every one of them, pulling out of the JICPOA, is it the right thing to do? 14 out of 14. Yes, it was. The best thing we could do, because their economy will collapse. Their ability to continue to be the #1 state sponsor for terrorism around the world is going to be hampered because we're doing this. It will cause the people within Iran to, continue to show challenges to the hierarchy and everything. And it's just going to cause them a lot of, belly aching that they don't need. And then their ability to continue to arm people like the Houthis with the shark boats and the Bab al-Mandeb in the Suez Canal and places like that. This was going to be hampered, okay? But when we do things like now, we're talking about re-entering the JICPOA and everything. I just think it's a bad idea. And the bottom line is people like Iran and its proxies and, to a certain extent, communist China and Russia, they only understand peace comes through strength. And if we, through our themes and messages, our posturing, and our, our ability to defeat, which will certainly give us the ability to deter, are all going to help in terms of having the desired effect on our adversaries.
Yeah.
And that's just one citizen's opinion. All right.
No, but I mean, it's, and I know we can find experts that will say the opposite, that it's important to be in it, but everything, but in real time right now, we have Iran openly against the state of Israel, and they are attacking our people. And look, I'm tired of seeing the Secretary of Defense say, I don't know how many Americans are in that country, nor can I protect them. I'm tired of seeing that. I'm tired of seeing people that have, and I'm critical of, look, I'm positive Secretary Austin could take it. I'm tired of seeing him lose. I'm tired of seeing him get it wrong. I'm tired of seeing our administrations go places and be half-assed with it. This is it. I don't know if this will resonate with you now, but I think it will. I've talked to a lot of SEALs. I've talked to a lot of Green Berets, and I've asked them the same question because I know it's true for me. Have I had more conversations or fired rounds in combat? And they all will say, I've had more conversations. Well, where's the bulk of your training? It's on bullets. Could you be better at conversations? Hell yeah, I could be better at conversations. And we don't do that. So we have all these goals and policies that we want to put in place, but we aren't preparing people to go do the thing that they're going to do the most. There's no, look, this might amaze you, but there is no advanced interpreter operation course. There is the smart card for emplacing a mine, like a Claymore mine, has more words in it than the CI manual on how to work with an interpreter. And that cannot be the case if we're going to go to these places. We need professional courses on how to engage with people. And there's so much great stuff in the civilian world, but look, our leaders, they failed us. These generals haven't figured out how to put the right people on the ground who can adapt to whatever they're at. You don't need to learn a language. You need to learn how to work an interpreter. That way you can go anywhere and be mission capable. We don't have that. And so we struggle with these small things. How can we get the big things right?
So Pete, I think you bring up a great point. And I found this out my first trip to Somalia, TF-111, our elite Navy special operators at the time, they were operating out of Libya and Somalia and places like that. And I showed up and the commander on the ground tells me, hey, what's the foreign policy guiding my military action here? The point was, now think of our guys in Libya at the time there. Yeah. Okay. There is a civil war going on in Libya, still today, between the Government of National Accord and the Libyan National Army. And one of the leaders is an American named General Haftar that's leading one of the forces. Our guys were there. They're not there anymore, but they were there doing counter-ISIS operations. They were getting into firefights more with the GNA and the LNA as they were in trying to take down ISIS terrorists. So the point is, all through the last 20 years, across the myriad of countries we're in, there's been a disconnect somewhat between what our foreign policy is, what the Department of State is trying to accomplish, and then what we are doing with our military actions that will complement that, which is why I'm so supportive of when the Army went to these Security Force Assistance Brigades and stood up this Security Force Assistance Command, because now we have tailored organizations that go in and get after integrated deterrence, which is what Secretary Austin's national defense strategy is all about. Integrated deterrence, building
Yeah.
partnerships, alliances, and everything that will keep us out of combat and everything. And I will tell you, I've known Lloyd Austin for over 3 decades. He was my brigade commander in the 82nd. I love that man to death. He is someone that I greatly respect. But I saw him about 6 months ago. I was in his office, and he looks tired. Okay.
Mhm.
He'll never tell you that. Okay. Because he is
Yeah.
110% dedicated to our nation and the mission. But I think all this BS he has to put up with, where there's this disconnect between foreign policy and military action, and then
Yeah.
congressional polarization and arguing and all that stuff,
Oof.
and
Yeah.
then the stuff that's coming out of the administration and everything. I mean, the toughest job on the
Yeah.
planet right now is to be the Secretary of Defense of the United States,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we have so many things going on, and we are trying to deter. We're trying to build with our partners and allies, but
Yeah.
we're also trying to stay out of conflict, in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, where we are on the verge of potentially being in it. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I'm with you, but I think what we've got to get right is what we're trying to do diplomatically and our foreign policy within a country. So if we are going to commit forces on a large scale back into the Middle East, because of, we've had 74 attacks, as I mentioned earlier already,
Yeah.
and I don't know what it's going to take for us to really use a heavy hand to get back after these proxies in Iran writ large. But if all of a sudden American soldiers start getting killed from these attacks,
Mm.
then we've got to have military action to counter this. But more importantly, we got to have a foreign policy that is the end state on what we're trying to get after, that our military action will complement. And unfortunately, I don't think we've had it right in the past few areas that we've been serving in.
I think someone from Israel should invite the Grand Ayatollah to a free vacation in Kuwait. Just like lights out. Then there you
Yeah.
go. Like, hey, you guys need to knock it off. I don't want to take too much time, but I do want to talk about your book real quick. I'll put the link back up. Oh, it's up right now. Surrender or Die. Let's talk about that real quick. And the link is right there below. You guys always know what I say, buddy, read it. So buy 2, give 1 to your friend. But tell us about your book.
Yeah. So, I spent 38 years in the U.S. Army, went from a guy that joined with no purpose, motivation, and direction, and, found a lot of mentorship, a lot of good leaders, found my way, and, and rose up and reached the pinnacle of the enlisted ranks as the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and got to serve in 5 different combat tours, starting with the combat jump in Operation Just Cause in Panama in 1989, then Desert Shield, Desert Storm, couple tours as a command sergeant major, like I talked, in Iraq, and also a tour as a corps level command sergeant major in Afghanistan. And then over the course of 4 years, advising the chairman, the SecDef, and the administration, traveling all over the world to where our troops were in places like I talked about in Africa, the Middle East, and stuff like that. And along the way, I met my wife when I was a young private. 40 years of marriage we're celebrating this year.
Wow.
And I went from a guy that barely graduated high school, that through my military experience ended up with a master's degree with a concentration in strategic leadership and everything. So
Yeah.
people kept telling me, and then at the pinnacle of my career, when I was the SEAC, because a guy like Jim Mattis, as our Secretary of Defense, was sending messages to anybody out there, the enemy out there, that we're not just going to defeat threats to the United States, we're going to annihilate them. And those messages having a huge impact on the force, our population, but more importantly, our enemy. I knew I had to, come up with themes and messages to complement what the chairman and secretary were saying.
Yeah.
And that's when I was in Raqqa, Syria, on a roof of a building with our most elite special operators on the Army side, your old buddies, and we were kicking the shit through our Syrian Democratic Force partners out of ISIS. But every time there was a lull in the fight, ISIS would come back with a suicide vest bomber or a vehicle-borne IED or something like that, that showed how resilient they still were. And so that was on the roof of that building. I said, hey, these assholes got two options. They can surrender or die. And if they surrender, we'll treat them humanely, safeguard them to a detainee holding facility cell, give them chow, a cot, and most importantly, due process. But I said, if they don't, then we're going to kill them, just like we're killing them today. You know, on that day in Raqqa, Syria, whether that's dropping bombs on them, shooting them in the face, or if need be, beating them to death with our entrenching tools. But the bottom line is they will not prevail. And so the sergeant major of that unit, a guy by the first name of Rob, told me, hey, you ought to put that in your update to Dunford and Mattis. So I did. And Mattis told me to keep saying it. And so I kept saying it, and it was never an issue. It was meant as a phrase to pump up the troops, to inspire, you know, to motivate and things like that. And it was never an issue till I was on a USO tour on Christmas Day in Bagram, Afghanistan, in a hangar. And I was on stage with General Dunford and Medal of Honor recipient Flo Groberg. And Flo and I had entrenching tools in our hands. And I said that really loud, and it blew the roof off the place. Thousands of troops, you know, loved it. The 2nd Ranger Battalion was there, and those guys said, hey, man, we're going out. We're going to find every one of these freaking terrorists in Nangarhar tonight and annihilate them, all right, because you got us fired up. But there was a Washington Post reporter there, and he came up and he said, I can't believe that you just asked the troops to go out and commit war crimes. I said, nothing is further from the truth. I said, we train soldiers, Marines, and battlefield airmen how to use non-standard weapons to neutralize enemy threats. And he said, well, I'm going to go public with this. And I thought to myself, all right, knock yourself out there, dude. But I thought, okay, where can this go? So I reached out to my trusty public affairs guy back in Washington, D.C., Rob Couture, and said, hey, here's what's going on. And he said, well, let's beat this guy to the punch. So I sent him a picture of me holding an entrenching tool in front of the troops. And we put it all on social media with my quote, and it went viral. We did it to stifle this energy from this potential article from this Washington Post guy. But all of a sudden it went viral. It was on the news in Germany. You know, U.S. non-commissioned officer threatens ISIS with a shovel and all this stuff. Germany, France, the UK, Japan. It was all. And as a matter of fact, ISIS started talking smack about me on their propaganda webpage. So what did we do? We started talking smack back to them. But the bottom line is, Washington, D.C. changed for a little bit for me when I came back. You know, the troops loved it. I was getting messages and letters and everything from all over the force saying, thank you. We needed to hear this message. But when I got back to Washington, D.C., it was kind of a different place. And in the end, long story short, you know, I had someone or some people file an IG complaint against me to the DOD IG, and I found myself suspended for 6 months. Pending this investigation, you know, that I created a hostile, toxic work environment. I used torturous language, these other things. And after a day or two of feeling sorry for myself because I was stuck in a cubicle, you know, and I had other cellmates with me, a couple general officers that were under investigation for the same thing. But I told myself, hey, I'm sending all these themes and messages, surrender or die and all this, but I ain't going to quit. People kept telling me, just retire. And I said, I ain't leaving. So I went to General Dunford. I said, there's only 2 ways this thing is going to end. You're either going to fire me and I'll retire, or you're going to reinstate me and I'm going to get after what I've been doing for the past 3 years. And so I sat there for 6 months, and finally in the end, you know, I was counseled for a couple of things, you know, but in the end, all the bad stuff that was said about me and everything went away, and I was reinstated. So the best comment I got was from a young Marine captain that was on General Dunford's staff. And after the media had posted all over that I was reinstated and everybody was, you know, all crazy, and she put a post that said, rest easy tonight, America, he's back. And that just energized me to get back after. So when people told me to write a book about my career and my experiences, there's only one thing I can title it: Surrender or Die, Reflections of a Combat Leader. And it talks about my career, it talks about family, talks about combat, talks about, you know, the after effects of combat with PTSD, TBI. I dedicate one chapter to being suspended and what it means to be stoic and get after it. And then I put some leadership tidbits in there and everything. And then I even dedicated one chapter to my wife and my family because, as you know, they are so important to the warrior, in order for them to be best prepared to defeat the enemy on the worst day of their life, if they know their family has their backing and everything like that. So yeah, it's a story from where a guy like me that came from Davenport, Iowa, as a young punk fighting every day on the streets, to joining the Army, spending 38 years and finishing off as the senior enlisted guy in the DOD and everything in between. So I hope that anybody that reads this can take some tidbits and walk away and say, man, if this guy can do it, I can do it too. Because I'm one of those guys, you know, that has no natural athletic ability on anything, you know, either really or metaphorically. And through hard work, discipline, and the support of family and friends and mentors, I was able to reach my untapped potential and accomplish goals. And so that's what the book's all about.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, that's great, man. I love it. And I don't want to say anything else. We could talk again for another hour and do it again. And I want to, but that was just fantastic. And I really appreciate it. And I will say this about Lloyd Austin. I'm not mad at the guy. Don't want his job. As you said, it's impossible, but you gotta be critical where the critical things are needed. And for as great as he is, it's also hard to get these things right. So that's my final word on
I
Lloyd
hear you,
Austin.
brother. Absolutely.
Anything else that you want to say before I roll these credits?
Hey, the only thing I want to say to the audience out there is, hey, there's a lot of things going on in the world. There's a lot of things that people have made critical about our military and everything. But now more than ever, the troops need our support. And if you are one of the 20 million veterans in the United States, you got to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. We have a recruiting crisis on our hands that could lead to us eroding competitive advantages against potential adversaries and everything. And if you're a veteran out there, you have a story that got you to where you are today. And that story needs to be told to this younger generation on what service in the military can do. So to my fellow veterans, to the citizens out there, we got to support our armed forces, because without our armed forces, we'll be speaking some other language and it won't be English.
That's true. All right, stand by. I'm going to come right back to you.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you.